Welcome to the Female Founder Unplugged podcast, a show for women entrepreneurs who want to build, grow, and lead successful businesses and high-performing teams. I'm your host, Lindsay White, leadership coach and people strategy expert, here to bring you unplugged conversations with a variety of amazing guests who share expert advice and real actionable people strategies for your growing business. Ready to get unplugged? Let's jump in. All right, with me today is Theresa Neil, the CEO and founder of the award-winning, women-led UX product design consultancy, Guidea, which I love. I love that mashup. She specializes in strategic product design for digital health and has a subspecialty in Femtech. We're going to talk a lot about that today. Business Insider has named her the top designer in technology. She's also the author of two really influential books, Mobile Design Pattern Gallery and the Designing Web Interfaces. And she's got another one coming. This woman is unstoppable. She works a great deal in, healthcare and that pharma sector. Some really notable name brands. We won't name drop, but she works with some big brands. And does some really incredible work, but is super passionate in particular about helping female founders in the tech sector actually create and grow and scale really incredible businesses. And that's really what we're going to focus on talking about today. So welcome. Thank you so much for coming on the Female Founder Unplugged podcast.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, it's absolutely my pleasure. And we just had a wonderful chat even before we hit record today. But I'm excited to learn a little bit more about you and your journey, how you got to be a female founder, and particularly in the Femtech space. I love that.
Well, almost 20 years ago, I was working as a software developer, and then I became a software designer. And I left the organization I was at, a large corporation. Great company, provided me a ton of support. I learned a lot, but I was ready to go out and move on to another role.
Yeah.
So I had a director of design role at a large agency. And a couple of weeks in, I realized this is not the right spot for me. When I started the role, I thought this is going to be great. I'm going to have wonderful mentorship from different women around the US because all the other design directors were women in all the different locations. When I started the role, I found out 2 of the 3 of them were on mental health leave, which is your first red flag in joining an organization.
Oh, Lord.
Your mentors are on mental health leave. This does not bode well necessarily.
No.
And then when I got into the organization, I realized that the folks in charge were not supporting the leaders and were allowing abusive clients to run the show.
Oh.
And I had taken this new role as a design director. I was going to recruit and grow my own team. And I was like, I can't possibly work in an organization that doesn't have my back. And it was a really, really hard choice because I had a little kid at home. My husband and I were undertaking a massive remodel of a hunting cabin that we were trying to live in. We were young. We didn't have any savings. And I'm about to walk away from this really high paying job that was supposed to be amazing. And I was like, no, I got to stick to my guns. Like if I'm not going to be respected at work and these folks don't have my back, I certainly can't grow a team here.
Yeah.
So I put in my notice, and I was doing a little bit of side work for some startups, and we basically almost went broke. And within, I think, 48 hours of each other, both of the startups got funded.
Wow.
And I got the checks of the money that I was owed. And from there on, I built out a consulting business. And within a couple of years, I had a team of folks and a co-founder. And that was in 2005. By 2008, we were working with PayPal. We made the first PayPal iPhone experience. And from there on out, it was just referral. And I grew and scaled with my team, this design agency.
What a beautiful way to grow a business. Just through great referrals, great work, showing up. Love that.
And then 2 years ago, it was actually June of 2022. I was thinking about what can we do to give back to women? Because we're a women-owned, women-led business, all women. And we work with startups, we work with scale ups, we work with enterprise, and we do work with female leaders, but we don't work with very many female entrepreneurs. Most of the folks that we run into on the tech side of things, the founders are generally male. And I'm not saying there aren't female tech founders, we just don't run into them as often.
Right.
And I was, well, let's change that. Why don't we find and attract these women and then provide them support as they grow their startups? And then I was like, wait a second, what if we look for Femtech founders? Because Femtech founders are more often than not female.
Yeah.
And then we would helping female or non-binary folks who are helping women's health. And I was like, oh, this would be perfect. We'll have women as helping women, the founders, help women. We got this. This will be perfect. So we spun up this program to provide pro bono and low bono design services to 2 or 3 startups. So we were going to pick 2 or 3 companies and put in like 50K of services. And we had this amazing call for applications and almost 100 applicants around the globe.
Wow.
And all of these founders who are so passionate about what they're working on, so qualified, like clinicians who are out there delivering babies, realizing there's a gap in maternal health care, and starting a tech company on the side of their practice to solve these problems. Or that other physicians noticing that they had patients coming in every day, like dealing with these problems, dealing with undiagnosed endometriosis, or dealing with PCOS, or dealing with any of this myriad of health conditions, and realizing, look, nobody's taking care of this. I'm going to have to create my own company to fix these problems. And these founders were so qualified and so passionate and getting so little attention from anybody else. They'd just been banging their heads against the wall, talking to VCs, talking to private equity firms, trying to get other sponsorships or support. And they were so grateful that we would even speak to them, which kind of broke my heart. You're like these like highly celebrated, lauded, educated, amazing founders, and they just didn't have anybody to speak to. And so we 30 companies instead of 3 support, and it changed our entire business model. And so we had already been working fairly deeply in health for the past 12 years, but then we kind of went all in and started building out a program to support Femtech founders through product market research, to go-to-market strategy, to developing a product plan, to doing the digital product design, to doing validation, and even helping companies package up their products for regulatory review so that they can go into FDA clearance. So this has evolved into a much bigger endeavor, and we have 58 startups that we're currently working with now, 2 years later.
I think that's just remarkable. And I had a conversation with my marketing manager just before we jumped on together. And, we were talking about, a specific gap. I'm a perimenopausal woman, and I am super comfortable talking about that. But there is a significant gap there for me in terms of, even in our beautiful socialized healthcare system here in Canada, the gap between the family doctor and any kind of specialist, and so I really appreciate what you're saying. It's very present for me. I know the demographic of who listens to this show. It's probably very present for them too. I love that these really brilliant, educated, experienced, remarkable women are seeing the gap and then really leveraging technology to do that. But that's problematic in itself. These aren't necessarily women that are tech founders. Their brilliance lives elsewhere. They've seen a gap and know that the technology can help fill the gap. And how do they approach that? So I love that you're filling that space for them, because I wouldn't know where to start. I'm sure they don't either.
Well, and so you've got clinicians, sometimes you have scientists, you have academic researchers. You're right. Their brilliance lies in developing a pharmaceutical, or developing a med tech device, or, or developing a new standard of care in well. But in a lot of cases, the not technology, like we all use an iPhone, but like building a digital product and launching a tech solution is generally new to a lot of these folks,
Yeah.
their first time through. And then also there's so much to learn around like regulated medical devices,
Oh,
the whole healthcare ecosystem. Like how do you
yeah.
come up with a good reimbursement strategy? What are those codes that are even
Oh,
available for the services that you're offering? Am I going to take this to payers, the insurance companies, or am I going to go direct to providers, or am I going to, have physicians prescribe it to patients, or I'm going to sell it on.
yeah.
And there's so many different options, and it's
Totally.
the wrong choice is so expensive. Can you imagine spending millions
Yes.
of dollars doing something to direct consumer when it actually maybe should have gone through a payer or a
Yeah.
provider prescribing? So
That's a very, very
learn.
costly mistake. Very costly. I can imagine. Wow. I think that that's remarkable. And I think it's remarkable that you started out wanting to help three and that grew exponentially. I mean, that is extraordinary.
It's definitely been a learning experience. I was talking to a founder earlier today, and she's like, I just want you to know how much I appreciate you. And I was like, well,
Oh, that's
because
wonderful.
well, we've learned a lot. It's not just us hanging out doing something good. Like I have learned a tremendous amount about women's health, about my own body, um,
Yeah.
and about how to support female founders. Like we naively thought we would be helping startups with product design, like, making
Yeah.
screen apps, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, yeah, basically there's, well, we already talked about, there's so much to learn about the healthcare ecosystem, about reimbursement strategies,
Yeah.
revenue strategies, technology, selecting good vendors for marketing, for advertising, for
Right.
brand, for engineering. But there's just absolutely so much to do in this space to support early stage entrepreneurs. And I feel privileged to have that space in their life to provide them like true support. Our program right now is currently pro bono, which
Mm.
has really opened up an opportunity for myself and my team to speak candidly with founders. We're not trying
Right.
to get anything out of anybody, right?
Yeah.
This is a free service. And so if we see something that where we raise an eyebrow of like, oh, that looks unusual for what we've seen in startups before, or oh, can I um, point you in this direction to look at additional resources of how we've seen other people be successful in this, we can just say it,
Yeah.
right? Because we're not bound to anything other than authentically trying to provide them support based on our, years of experience in tech.
And I'm sure that's got to be really refreshing for your founders because, again, I can imagine like my lane is over there. My lane is on that side of the street. And now I'm on a side of the street I've never been on before. And so I don't know. I am consciously incompetent, right? Like I am aware enough to know that I don't know what I'm doing in this space.
Mhm.
And having your team be able to provide some of that guidance and just give really beautiful, straightforward, constructive feedback with kindness and caring, like in service of growing their business, like that's got to be really refreshing and really make those founders feel very secure in what they're getting from you.
Yeah, we do hear that a lot, that they feel empowered and seen and heard. I'm not just saying this to, like, pat myself on the back, like,
No,
okay, good
no.
job, but I didn't realize this was like a service we were going to be providing to startups, right? To actually like provide that level of coaching, and then just like a set of best practices
Yeah.
for when you're growing or scaling a tech company. Here are some things to consider. Like one of the pieces of advice that we give all the time is building your company is kind of like a building a house or a home remodel. You wouldn't, I don't think most people would go into it. Well, to back up, building a house or a remodel does tend to ruin a bunch of marriages, right? Because it's a very stressful
Fair
endeavor.
enough.
And it's
Yes.
because there's so many like moving pieces that you have to
Yes.
take care of. And most people only do this once or twice in a lifetime, right? You're not like
Yeah.
sure contractor. So it's kind of the same with the startup of like, you have to like understand how all the moving pieces fit together, even if you're not an expert in plumbing or electric. You need to know
Yes.
where they're going to go first. And then one of the key points of advice we give all the time is we want you to go get 3 bids.
Yeah.
Not because the first person you talked to, the first electrician, wasn't the right one, but when you go and get 2 more bids, then you can see how different people might approach the challenge. And you will learn something from that in itself. And
Yeah.
how do these teams speak to you and interact with you, especially as a female founder, when they know that you're getting competitive bids
Yeah.
versus if they don't think you're getting competitive bids? I'll tell you, you'll get better pricing if they know you're getting competitive.
Yeah.
But also, again, you can just look at these different proposals, whether it's for marketing or engineering, and start to understand, oh, different teams operate in different ways. And that's a great way to learn and grow a little bit in each of these areas that you have to learn, right? Because as a
Yeah.
founder, you have to learn a little bit about accounting and a little bit about legal and a little bit about brand and a little bit about advertising,
Yeah.
right? Like, and you don't need to be an expert in each, but you need to like know enough to not be a fool. And so in getting
Yeah.
those bids, you start to elevate your own understanding of
Yeah.
the possibilities in each of these spaces.
I totally think that that philosophy is universal. I mean, we're talking very specifically about women and in their tech startup spaces. But I coach women every day who are founders of businesses, whether they're product or service based. And the truth is, I think what you've just said is highly relevant for any woman who is founding and leading and growing her own business. You absolutely need to be getting competitive bids. You need to be having conversations with multiple vendors or providers. Even me as a coach, I encourage people when they come to me and say, I think it's time for me to have a leadership coach. I need to grow my capacity and my capability. I always say to them, have you talked to anyone else? Well, no, my friend referred me to you, Lindsay. Okay, but I actually want you to go and this has to be the right fit. I want you to go and have that experience with other coaches. If you don't know who to talk to, here's 2 or 3 other ways. I mean, I have a lovely network of colleagues. Please go and talk to them. Come back when you're ready. We can get started at any point, but I want to broaden your perspective and put you in the driver's seat in terms of selecting who you're going to work with. And I think that is so key no matter what kind of business you're building. So I love that you brought that up.
Yeah, and I think once you get into the practice, it's second nature, but it is, especially
Totally.
for people who don't like maybe confrontation or feel a little awkward with it. It's a really good skill to develop. And I think one of the next ones is when you get a set of proposals, right? Like I'm not an
Yeah.
electrician, I'm not a plumber, right? I get a
No.
set of proposals and I don't understand them. We're not just going to pick the most expensive because obviously that's the best, or the least expensive because hey, we're a startup, we don't have any money. Now let's ask some critical questions,
Yeah.
or but also be comfortable with asking what might be dumb questions, because you're about to embark on a relationship with this vendor, especially like what you're talking about with like executive coaching, but really in any of
In
these
any.
any vendor
Yes.
relationship partner experience,
Yes.
if the company and the folks in the company can't adequately or sufficiently or comfortably answer your questions, it might not be the right fit. It doesn't mean they're a bad company, but like how do they respond?
Yes.
And I see
Yes.
many vendors speak to female founders as if they're incapable of
Yes.
understanding or not worth explaining the
Yeah.
information to.
Yeah.
And that's a red flag if they're not willing to take the time and answer the questions.
100%.
On the flip side, we also sometimes get very, very early stage founders that they go way, way, way overboard. And it starts to become a flag to us that there's no way we could possibly help this early stage founder because they're too immature in the process. They
Yes.
haven't done any research at all to even meet us halfway. So I don't want to say that we ever dissuade people from asking questions, but you know, if we've spent 3 or 4 hours on a proposal and there's 30 to 40 hours of questions, that's indicative of there's too big of a gap.
Yeah.
of knowledge for us to probably, help this person elevate to the next level. So if you're completely baffled by 3 proposals that you've
Yeah.
got, it might be time to look for maybe an accelerator program, a mentorship program,
Yes,
somebody who can help you decipher this. Maybe has a little more expertise in the space that can start to do some translation for you, who you really trust.
totally. But you're still doing them an enormous favor because you're not taking them into a situation that is not going to be productive. It's not going to serve them,
Right.
right? And I think personally, any provider that unequivocally says to you, I can help you no matter what and no matter when and no matter where you're at, is actually doing you a disservice. Because the truth is, we all have spaces that we specialize in, right? And so, yeah, sending them away and saying, here's some resources that might help you where you're at right now. Come back to us in 6 months once you've been through the accelerator,
Yeah.
right? Or for me, come back when you are actually ready in order to start building the team. When your mindset is ready to start leading effectively. There's no
Mhm.
point us working together. You're not there yet. Like, I actually think that's real integrity
Yeah.
in then how we're dealing with these founders and just being very clear and honest.
Agreed.
I love it. Okay, so one of the things that, Theresa and I were talking about before we hit record is actually, building on what we're talking about right now, this idea of how do you how do you create this board of advisors is maybe the way I would frame it. Teresa, you use your language, but how do you find the right people to work with? How do you create that community that's going to help you grow and evolve your business? Because that's actually really important as we do this, as we grow these beautiful businesses that we're so passionate about. What are your thoughts on this? What have you seen or learned as you've worked with all these different women in their businesses?
Well, one of the things that we have done over the past 2 years, and we're just now getting to the point of being able to publish this to the almost 60 teams that are participating in Femabate, is we have sussed out a set of trusted providers that we can recommend. Like you were saying, oh, if somebody comes to me for coaching, I can give you names of other people and
Yeah.
your colleagues that I trust. So that's what we've started to set up. So we've identified a couple of experts in the regulatory space and a couple of experts in the SBIR grant writing space and a couple, in brand and a couple in different. So basically we were putting together this network of trusted providers and that maybe we at Guidea have used. Like we're like, these accountants
Yeah.
have done an upstanding and outstanding job for us. Feel free to include them when you go get your quotes, right? And like this
Yeah.
for us, and this is how they've done a good job. Or this grant writing company has helped numerous startups that we've interacted with, be awarded grants, and
Yeah.
we've met them, and they have, our values align, and so we're building out that ecosystem. But we didn't, obviously we didn't come up with that. Other accelerators and incubators have, and there's all types of great programs out there for women. You mentioned a couple to me in Canada
Yeah.
earlier, but like Springboard Enterprises is a nonprofit who's helped dozens, if not hundreds, of female founders grow and scale their companies, and they have an ecosystem of trusted providers. There's another organization called Fourth Wave, which does another nonprofit, and they provide counseling where successful female startup founders come back and work with aspiring founders. And so they're providing advice that has worked for other female founders. So that's kind of like, these are some of the good things, like these nonprofit organizations that are helping grow and scale women. There's kind of, I don't want to say the flip side, but there's a couple of things to maybe keep an eye on if you're building out if you're an early stage startup and you're building out a set of advisors, is female founders tend to give away more equity early than men do.
Yeah.
And I read recently that that is actually hurting the whole ecosystem of women supporting women, and investing back in women, because you have all these female founders who give away a lot of equity early. They don't cash out with as much at
Yeah.
exit. So they don't have as much to put back in.
100%. Why do you think that is? Why do you think women give away equity too early in their startup?
I'm sure this is not a opinion held by everybody, but one of the things that I noticed, like I said, when we had all these folks applying for Femtech for the very first round, so this is a program no
Yeah.
one's anything about.
Yeah.
We're a tiny little design agency. We've got a great portfolio, but probably
Yeah.
none of these companies have ever heard of us before.
Yeah.
And they were so grateful that we would speak to them. I think it's a gratitude thing, because if you're a female founder, you're trying to raise, women in tech are only getting 2% of VC funding. That means many of these female founders have been banging their head against the wall
Yeah.
for months, if not years, of no, 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 or just being ghosted. And so there's this gratitude when somebody finally agrees to help. And I wonder if it might be like over gratitude. I've had people in our first phone call together offer me equity. And I'm like, well, I want you to hold on to your equity. Hold on.
Yeah,
Hold on.
that makes sense though.
And I think it might just be over gratitude. Because like if you've
Yeah.
been pushed down for so
Yeah.
long, then you
Yeah.
are feeling grateful. But you don't want to give away a bunch of your company early.
No, I agree, right? You spend a lot of, I mean, blood, sweat, and tears. Like, let's be honest. That's truly what it is that we put into our organizations,
Mhm.
especially when we're in the early stages, the first few years. It really is all about us, um, putting everything we've got into these businesses. And yes, I can really appreciate the idea though that yeah, I'm so excited that someone actually wants to talk to me about this and is interested in helping me grow it. And so am I too quick to offer up the most valuable asset I have, and that's a piece of my business.
Exactly. And so as you're building like an advisor board, um, you know, be very thoughtful if you're offering
Yeah.
equity in exchange for an advisory role, and make sure that's a requirement for that person to help and participate with you, because a lot of times that may not be a requirement.
Yeah,
Uh,
and I think that's a great point. Like I often say, being an entrepreneur can be lonely. You do have to pay people to play with you, right? It's not like working in corporate where you're surrounded by a team. Now,
mhm,
sometimes that team is great, sometimes they're atrocious. Be careful what you wish for, right? But then you enter into this space of being a founder. And you do have to start to find people that have expertise in spaces that you don't,
mhm.
right? Again, no matter if you're in the tech space, if you're a product or service based, sometimes you're going to bump up against something you just don't know much about, right? And you need that expertise. But I think your point is really well taken. When you're looking to build that community, that advisory board, that group of people that are going to invest in helping you grow your business, man, you better make damn sure that those people are aligned with your values, like,
Mhm.
and those values you bring to your business, like what is important, that they have to get that vision, that what are you trying to create?
Yeah.
Like, you have got to be very clear yourself first to then be able to actually recruit and actively connect and work with those advisors. I think that's so critical. What do you think, Theresa?
I totally agree. And I think you should do due diligence with advisors too, because
You
it's
bet.
easy. And I have done this myself. I am not faulting anybody for falling under the spell of a very successful person
Yes.
who is interested in what you're doing. I've
Yes.
been in that same spot. But due diligence. Is this person who's going to advise, what is their actual experience in this space, helping potentially a female or non-binary
Yeah.
founder,
Yeah.
underprivileged founder grow?
Yes.
Because just somebody, like, let's say you're doing period panties and you're like, oh my gosh, I'm gonna play with Ida Tin for me, because she's the
Yeah.
mother of Femtech. Ida 10's interested in me. Okay, but has she actually brought a physical consumer packaged good product to market before? Now, you might be like, well, it's Ida 10, she can do anything, and she certainly can. But let's say it's somebody else. Well, you're doing a digital product and they're doing it, they've had success in the consumer packaged good. It doesn't mean they're not going to have value to you, but if you're counting on them to help you
Yes.
navigate launching a digital product, again, maybe you want to look at 3 different potential advisors and see who has the skills that are germane to the product that you're trying to bring forward, and not just pick them because they've had success in a tangential field before, or they are a big name, or they might be connected to somebody who's going to invest in you. Like, just drill in, look past the fame, be critical, and discerning about what skills are they actually bringing to the table. And I bring this up for another topic as well, is I see a lot of really good intentioned, well-intentioned advisors giving female founders advice that it would be very bad for a
Yeah.
female founder to follow, because it's a male lens advice.
Yeah.
Like, if you go in to pitch, make sure you ask the private equity company 6 important questions. Okay, well, do you know what happens to women who walk into a room full of men and start off the cuff just asking 6,
Yeah.
balls of questions? That's not perceived the same way when a woman does that as when a man does that. And so, it might be worth, in building out your board and advisors, being like, I'd like to know other female founders that you have coached and mentored, what's worked well for
Yeah.
them, how you go about coaching it, like, just get a little bit of a feel for, which do they have any women who are direct reports that they have grown within their organization or within their startup? What is their experience in
Yeah.
coaching with things that are really going to work for women and not
Yeah.
just things that work for guys in the past?
No, like, honestly, so it's so critical. I mean, I'm just listening to you talk about this, and this is wonderful advice. It doesn't matter if you're growing a tech business or not, but certainly in that space, there are very specific needs and issues. But I love this idea of, know yourself well enough, right? So your example of, the tech guru comes in and says, you got to go in and ask these 6 big questions and ask them this way and be real. Know yourself well enough to know that that actually isn't authentic. That is, like, just listening to you, I can hear that and I get the shivers, because I think I would want to ask those 6 questions, but I'm going to enter into that conversation a very different way.
Right.
Right. And so know yourself well enough to know the value that you bring, know the expertise that you like. That is actually really key here, so that you can hear the advice, hear the thoughts, take it all in, and process it in a way that is meaningful for you and your business. Like, that's so key here, Teresa.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And like that may be great advice as part of 10 different pieces of advice that you receive. And you ultimately, your takeaway is, you know what? This is a two-way street. When I'm talking to a potential investor, I want to learn as much about them as they want to
Yes.
me. However, I don't tend to storm in a room and, like, you know,
Yeah, give me all this and a bag of chips. That's not who we
pepper a
are.
bunch of people with questions and turn them off immediately. That might be something that I do due diligence before that in-person meeting, or I meet with somebody separately to ask those questions, and I don't blow my 15-minute pitch doing
Yeah.
that. Right.
Well,
Roll
and
it into your tool bag.
right. And, you know, really, I love your idea of being very thoughtful and intentional about asking, how many female founders have you mentored? What kind of work what kinds of like, what were they doing? How did you support them? What did that relationship look like? Really understand, but ultimately you got to understand, what are you looking for? Asking the questions is great, but if you're not clear on what you are going to need, at least to some degree,
Right.
then the answers won't be relevant in any way. So again, you have to be clear about, what do you need? What does your business need? What are you looking for? What might that look like? And
Yeah.
while still remaining open to, hey, that's an interesting possibility. I never thought about it that way before.
Yeah, definitely. And I think another key question to ask is around like, have you encountered any differences between mentoring male and female founders, or have you
Yeah,
encountered any differences in supporting founders with like a consumer packaged good product versus digital or something like that?
100%.
That begins to tell you something about this person and what
100%.
level of hands-on interaction they have mentoring, what they've done in previous companies. And it doesn't mean that they won't be a valuable champion for you, but it might not be the person that you put in as an advisor to help you over a particular challenge that you're trying to
Beautifully
solve
said.
now.
Yes. Yeah, and what a lovely distinction you've made there between someone who's going to be a champion and someone who's going to be an advisor, and how different those two things look, right? I think we get them confused.
Yes, that's true. I can be lots of founders champions, but I unfortunately don't have the bandwidth, and it would be disingenuous for me to take on advising roles with all those companies because I
Right.
simply I don't have that many hours in the day to do
Yeah.
a job to help them with the things that they need. And so I've declined many advisor roles, and even director roles because they just don't have the bandwidth, and that's not fair to that's not
No.
fair to the company. So that's another thing to look at. It's like how many advisor or director, or excuse me, board of director roles, how many pies do they have their fingers in? Are they going to be able to give you the attention you need when you need it, and at what cost?
Yeah, 100%. And I think at yes, and at what cost? And not just, again, not just the financial part, right? Giving away equity in your business or paying them fees or stipends or whatever, but also, is there an intrinsic cost? Right? Are they going to be perhaps someone who's not accessible when you need them? Or the opposite, are they going to be a bit of a drain? Like what
Right.
really thinking beyond the dollars and cents, I think is so critical because we have to be very clear. These people have a huge impact on our business and also on us personally as founders. And it's absolutely key that we're clear that we're getting the person who's going to contribute in a really deeply meaningful way.
I almost hesitate to bring this up, but this has now become a pattern. I have also heard of, a lot of femtech founders are female. Many of them are young women.
Yep.
And I have heard of advisors just recently, again, in a with a power dynamic.
Yeah.
And so that's just another thing to kind of be aware of in selecting your advisors, and think about like especially if you're doing it for equity, but for pay or any type
Yeah.
of relationship. Can I get a reference?
Yeah.
So speak to other women they've been advised
Yes.
for, and hopefully other women will be forthright if there was any type of power dynamic issue or anything
Yeah.
that off, or they just didn't get the support that they need. And it makes sense if they haven't been an advisor before, they may not be able to give a reference for that advisor role, but surely they've had direct reports.
Yeah.
Project
Yeah.
manager working for you that I could speak with. I just want to learn more. I'm excited about working with you. It doesn't have to
Yeah.
be like, I'm worried you're a creep. Can I get a reference?
Yes.
Right?
No, but
The due diligence.
I think that makes a lot of sense and sort of framing it in that space of, I want us to do really great work together. And so, as much, again, all of this, just like when you're interviewing for staff, you're
Yes.
interviewing and interviews work. You said it earlier, interviews work both ways. So they're asking you about your business and what you're doing and what your vision and what your plans and what all the strategies. And you need to be interviewing them to ask about what's your experience, what's your perspective, what do you value most, how are you going to add like for real, we need to have enough presence,
Mhm.
we need to lead. And I mean, this is my shtick in particular, but we need to be confident leaders in our businesses, whether it's just us as a solopreneur or we're starting to build teams, we're starting to build boards. We need to lead effectively. And so being really clear about how you lead, how you're showing up, and being confident enough to ask great questions. And then ready for the feedback, like, brace yourself, right? But that is just so the more we talk, the more compelled I just feel to state that because it's just really critical.
It's true. And I think this probably segues more into what you're providing as a service than I am. But if you're feeling yourself, listening to this and feeling anxious about asking potential advisors these
Yeah.
questions, that's actually maybe information for yourself
Yeah.
to maybe engage a coach or
Yeah.
um, do a little bit of self-reflection of how do I get to the point of being comfortable asking these questions? Because you have to ask them as a leader. You
Yeah.
have.
You have to.
Even if you're like, what, well, maybe this isn't exactly the way I want it, but I'll be okay with it. What about as you're growing and building your team?
Yeah.
Did you set everything up well for this team
Yeah.
that you're going to be growing? Um,
Yes.
and just some practical advice. If you're thinking like, okay, I have a little bit of anxiety, but I got this, I can do it, I'm going to ask these questions. A good time to do it is if you have an advisor coming in, they're going to want to know information about your company. So they're going
Yeah.
to for like your tech room or your pitch deck or when they're asking you for information about your company, you can in turn say, oh, and
Right.
I want to we typically, or I like to find out these pieces of information. So it feels reciprocal because you're about to give them a bunch of information, usually confidential, about your company, your
Yeah.
organization, your plans, your vision. So asking a potential advisor in return for, I'd love some references. Can you tell me a little bit about, when you've mentored in the past? What are some success stories? What have you learned? What are some
Yeah.
failures? It feels reciprocal. And if you still are really anxious about that, then maybe some coaching and self-reflection will help get you to that level of confidence
100%.
of representing yourself.
100%. So my mother always said you teach people how to treat you. And
Yep.
that's exactly what you're talking about. You are teaching that potential advisor, that potential funder, that potential contributor right from the start that this is a reciprocal relationship.
Right.
You're not being snotty or bitchy or feisty or any of those things. You're being very clear that this is the relationship you wish to build. There is absolutely nothing wrong with that. The other thing I would add, because I want to validate everything you said, I thought was just brilliant. My and would be if you are getting questions or responses from that person that actually fuels that trash conversation in your own head, that own inner critic, that own judgmental voice.
Mhm.
Well, I shouldn't be asking those questions and I really don't know and I'm not enough and they're way better than I am and I'm not smart and I don't know if what they're asking you or what they're saying to you fuels that trash talk in your head, that is very clear data that
Mhm.
something is not right. Doesn't mean that what they're saying to you is wrong. It means that you need to think very carefully about your reaction to that and why it is fueling the trash talk.
Yeah.
Did I make sense when I said that out loud?
It does. My director of research and I were just in a meeting with a prospective client yesterday, and she was very clear, female founder, very clear that logistics were her thing. And
Okay.
technology space and designing for consumer engagement was not her thing. She's like, that's not my swim lane. It's out of my area of
Okay.
expertise. And I was like, yes. And I'll let you say that or we'll say that for this moment. But I was like, but if we're working together, I want you to come play and learn.
Yes.
So in a couple of months, you're no longer saying that. I
Yes.
want you to come to the point of feeling like, yeah, it's not my lane. I'm not going to go out there and become a UX designer or go out there and do
Right.
one-on-one research with people. But I don't want you to feel like you don't know it or understand it at all. And this is some black box. You're setting yourself up to be taken advantage
Yeah,
of.
exactly. Yeah.
Let's work on this together. I want you to
Yeah.
come in. We'll try to do a really good job of teaching you what's really important that you need to pay attention to, and some
Yeah.
things you just don't need to go that deep. But
Yeah.
our message back to her is we want to elevate you. We want you to get comfortable in this.
Yes.
And we're not totally okay with you opting out. I do
No.
want you to engage and take some level of responsibility with it. So that's an expectation that we have for
Yeah.
the founders, that like
Yeah.
when we're done, we don't want you still saying, gosh, I don't know that space. And you just take care of it for me. I'm like,
Yeah.
no, you're gonna have to give a little.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I love it. And if we set that expectation with everyone who participates in our business with us, that
Mhm.
actually know I'm deeply interested, and I want, I want to know enough to be dangerous, as they say, right?
Yes.
I think that, if you then have someone responding that's like, well, no, you don't need to know that. That's not your lane. You need to get out of the way. I'm smarter than you. I know better. I think you need to recognize the tinglies that will come on the inside.
Mhm.
You'll feel your spidey senses will go off.
Yeah.
That's data you need to pay attention to, because it's your business. And
Yeah.
of course, you need to have some idea of what's going on. You don't need to be an expert at everything, but you do need to have insight into most. And I think that's really key.
Yeah, and it's so tempting to be like, oh, thank goodness somebody's going to handle the
Yeah.
technology for me, or oh,
Yeah.
thank goodness somebody's going to handle the regulatory for me. But you just, as a business owner, you just don't get off that easy.
No.
That's just a recipe for spending a bunch
Yeah.
of money being unhappy with the results later. Unfortunately, you're going to have to engage in some level, even in the thing that's like least interesting to you,
Yeah.
right?
110%.
Yeah.
Um, Theresa, thank you so much. I feel like we could continue to talk about this for the rest of the afternoon. But I'm sure grateful that we got to have this chat today, particularly in this femtech space, which is so it's just burgeoning, right? Like it's really it's a high growth space. And there are, like you said, so many young women that are entering into this, and it's exciting. It's really exciting.
Thank you so much for having me and letting me share my tactical and practical advice, and then some of my hypothesis of why we are where we are now.
No, I love this. So many takeaways in this conversation, and I'm super grateful you shared them all with us.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you so much for tuning in to the Female Founder Unplugged podcast. I hope you enjoyed listening as much as I did hosting this conversation. I feel so lucky that I get to connect with such amazing female entrepreneurs. And if you enjoyed today's session, would you do me a big favor? Would you hit subscribe and give this episode a 5-star review? I'd also love it if you would share with your friends. We've got a goal here at the Female Founder Unplugged podcast to impact 1,000 female founders. And with your help, we can really amplify the message. Thanks again for being a part of the show. And don't forget to connect with me at highvoltageleadership.ca. We'll see you next week.